As the film begins, Iris lies on the bed with a distant, haunted look in her eyes. Her husband sleeps soundly beside her, oblivious. After a while, Iris quietly slips out of bed, retrieves a knife from a drawer, and heads out of the house, leaving her phone behind. She drives through a dense, dark forest, the silence around her thick and oppressive. Parking her car, she trudges up the steep, rocky mountain path. When she finally reaches the top, she places a small toy boat, a memento of her son, at a lonely memorial and gazes at a photograph of him with grief clouding her face. She begins to carve his unfinished initial, an M for Mateo, into a nearby tree. The stillness is broken by a scraping noise that makes her pause. She looks around cautiously, but there's nothing there, just the wind. Her eyes drift to the edge of the cliff, and with trembling hands, she contemplates jumping, her body tense with despair. At that moment, she's interrupted by a man named Richard, who appears unexpectedly on the trail. He inquires about the memorial, but Iris remains tight-lipped. Sensing her turmoil, Richard tries to break the tension with dark humor, suggesting that if she's going to jump, she should at least introduce herself. She stays silent. Richard, undeterred, begins sharing pieces of his own life story, confessing that he was once a car enthusiast. He reveals that his life took a dark turn during college when he was in a terrible car accident with his girlfriend, Chloe. They were arguing when the crash happened, and the last words he said to her still haunt him. Iris softly says she's sorry, and Richard explains how he spent months bedridden in the hospital, physically and emotionally shattered. Iris finally opens up about her own tragedy, the death of her son, Mateo. She recalls how, on a family outing, her husband had been carving their initials into a tree while Mateo gathered sticks to roast marshmallows. Mateo had boasted he could collect them in under a minute, but Iris, distracted by gathering wildflowers, didn't hear him when he fell. Overwhelmed with guilt, she confesses that she feels broken, that the world took her son from her and left her empty. Richard listens, offering her words of comfort and assuring her that being broken doesn't mean she's beyond hope. As he prepares to leave, Iris finally tells him her name. Before he goes, Richard reminds her that she still has choices and gestures to the beauty of the day around them. They walk down the mountain trail together in silence. At the parking lot, Iris and Richard reach their cars, and she bids him goodbye. Richard pauses, asking if she would have jumped if he hadn't shown up, but she reassures him she wouldn't, at least, not today. He gives her a gentle smile and responds, "I'll take today," before getting into his car. However, he is parked so close to hers that she struggles to get in. Seeing her predicament, Richard exits his car, approaching with a strange umbrella in his hand. When she asks if it's for rain, he smirks and says, "You can never be too prepared." Suddenly, he thrusts the base of the umbrella into her stomach, releasing a jolt of electricity that makes her collapse. He hogties her, places her in the back seat of his car, and drives off. When Iris regains consciousness, panic floods through her. She tries to contact her husband using her smartwatch, but Richard catches her, smugly informing her that she won't get any signal in the middle of nowhere. Iris pleads with him, insisting her husband will come looking for her, and that he doesn't have to do this. Richard coldly dismisses her, saying he's heard similar pleas from the women he's kidnapped before. Claims of families, children, of being a mother, all things he's long ceased to care about. In a twisted gesture, he places her son's toy boat near her, a reminder of her agony. As Richard becomes distracted, Iris cleverly retrieves the knife she had hidden and begins cutting through the plastic ties binding her. She tries to keep him talking to avoid suspicion, asking him about his girlfriend, Chloe. Richard grows quiet, then admits that she was beautiful and that Iris reminds him of her. Iris warily asks what he plans to do to her, and with an unsettling calm, he reveals that he has a secluded spot in the woods where he'll take her, and that he'd like to braid her hair. In a flash, Iris breaks free of her bonds and lunges at him. A brutal struggle ensues, and in the chaos, the car veers off the road and crashes into a tree. Desperate, Iris scrambles to get out, but Richard grabs her by the hair, dragging her back. She fights back with all her strength, managing to escape his grasp. She bolts out of the car, her breath shallow, her heart racing. She clutches the toy boat in her pocket as if it could give her strength. But just as she begins to think she might have escaped, Richard materializes in front of her, blocking her path. Richard's voice cuts through the silence, an unnerving calm in his tone. He asks Iris, "Have you started to feel anything yet?" Confused, Iris demands to explain himself. With a cold smile, Richard reveals he's injected her with a paralyzing drug. Her body, he explains, will shut down completely in about 20 minutes. Richard begins to outline her fate with chilling precision. In just 1 minute, her fine motor skills will begin to fail, making it impossible to hold anything, a knife, a phone. By the 10-minute mark, her legs will start tingling, and by minute 15, they'll give out entirely. At 18 minutes, her breathing will become strained, and by minute 20, her voice will vanish, leaving her utterly helpless as her body locks in paralysis. Iris starts running. She stumbles and dropping the knife, but keeps running. Desperately, she tries to stay grounded by counting on her fingers, remembering the way she once taught her son to count. She snapped back to the present as she sees Richard's dark figure approaching, taunting her about the time they have together for the weekend. She scrambles away, setting her watch to 20 minutes to track the drug's merciless progression. As her legs weaken, she begins to drag herself through the forest, her foot trailing behind. With each passing minute, her limbs grow heavier, her breaths more labored. Her vision blurs, but she refuses to stop, using every ounce of strength to crawl forward. She slips into a hollow tree trunk, trying to conceal herself. Inside, she's met with a writhing swarm of ants, but she's too far gone to flinch, the pain agonizing yet grounding. Her sobs break the silence, and Richard's voice calls out, his footsteps closing in. Summoning her last reserves of energy, Iris hurls herself out of the tree trunk and rolls into a nearby stream. The current sweeps her away, her body limp and barely responsive, until she's washed up on a stranger's lawn. A thin, elderly man, sitting on a grass cutter, notices her motionless figure sprawled across his grass. He approaches and speaks, but she can't move her mouth to respond. Her eyes, however, still follow his gestures. Realizing she's aware, he waves a finger in front of her face. "Can you hear me?" he asks, and she blinks once, desperately signaling yes. He moves closer. "Can you move?" She blinks twice, signaling no. "Are you hurt?" he asks, and she blinks twice again. He gently assures her he'll help, that he'll call 911, and she blinks once to signal her approval. With care, he lifts her into a wheelbarrow, hauling her inside. But their brief respite is shattered by a sudden knock at the door. Iris, wide-eyed with terror, blinks rapidly, trying to convey her warning. Her rescuer, however, doesn't understand her signals, and he heads to the door. He opens it to find a disheveled, wild-eyed Richard standing before him. Richard asks if he's seen his wife, describing her as small, beautiful, claiming they were in a car accident. Suspicion flickers in the old man's eyes. He informs Richard he'll call for help and closes the door. But Richard forces his way inside, scanning the room as his eyes search for any sign of Iris. The old man threatens to call the police, but Richard, unbothered, insists he's lost his phone and only wants his wife back. He introduces himself as Andrew, claiming his wife suffers from severe mental health issues. His tone shifts as he recounts their last moments together, saying she was driving during a heated argument, floored the gas pedal, and crashed the car. Now he can't remember what happened after that. The old man listens, though his suspicions deepen. "What's her name?" he asks, and Richard replies, "Chloe." Behind the sofa, barely breathing, Iris listens to every word, her heart racing. Richard continues his story, saying his wife becomes catatonic during episodes, and the old man nods sympathetically. Richard casually asks if the old man has anyone in his life. Reluctantly, the old man shares a bit about his late wife, who had suffered a heart attack after years of neglecting her own health to care for him. A smirk forms on Richard's face as he remarks, "The world takes what it wants." It's a line Iris had once spoken to him, words that now feel hollow and twisted. "Do you love her?" the old man asks quietly, and Richard's response is a simple, unsettling yes. Just as the old man seems ready to disclose where he's hidden Iris, Richard's phone buzzes from his pocket. Suspicion hardens in the old man's gaze. "I thought you said you lost your phone," he asks pointedly. Caught, Richard stammers, blaming his memory and confusion, asking again where Iris might be. The old man deflects, stalling, and mutters that she might be in the garden shed. But Richard, unconvinced, orders him to hand over the phone, his eyes narrowing with renewed intensity. The old man uses the opportunity to push Richard into the shelves, hard, bringing down the shelves on him. But he doesn't stay down. Lunging forward, he wrestles the old man, and a brutal fight ensues. As they grapple, Richard seizes a knife and, with chilling precision, distracts the old man by taunting him. The words catch the old man off guard, and Richard plunges the knife deep into his foot, and mercilessly, he stabs the old man again and again. But Iris, Richard's ultimate goal, remains out of sight. Desperation mounting, Richard drenches the house in gasoline and lights a match, setting the place ablaze. As flames consume the home, Iris manages to signal him by drawing a blind at a nearby window. Noticing her just in time, Richard charges into the inferno, scoops her up, and carries her to his car. He places her safely inside, catching his breath before muttering that he's never killed a man before. Then, with a dark grin, adds, "There's a first time for everything." Just as he settles in the car, he receives an unexpected call from his daughter, who excitedly tells him about her good grades. His wife, Lizzie, mentions she wants him to take their daughter Olivia to the family cabin. With an uneasy laugh, Richard agrees, though he's reluctant to drive. Richard notices their fuel is low and pulls over at a remote gas station. While he goes inside to pay, cash only, as the card machine is down, Iris, frail and silent, struggles to free herself from her seatbelt. A car pulls up nearby, and a mother and child step out. The child curiously peers into Richard's car, making brief eye contact with Iris, who is reminded painfully of her own lost son. The mother quickly reprimands her child and, suspiciously eyeing Iris, pulls her away. Just as Richard returns, he refuels, buckles Iris back in, and drives them to the crash site where this grim journey began. At the crash site, Richard changes his clothes, methodically transfers tools from the old man's truck to his own car, and starts making repairs. However, his plans are interrupted when a police car pulls up. The officer approaches, asking about the situation, and Richard calmly explains that his drunk wife crashed their car. But then, the officer mentions he received a call from the gas station attendant, sensing something was off. This time, Iris manages to whisper for help to the officer. As he steps closer, straining to hear her plea, Richard seizes the moment. He ambushes the officer, killing him in cold blood. With cold efficiency, he pours gasoline over the police car and sets it ablaze before driving away with Iris once more. As they drive, Iris confronts Richard, questioning whether he's trapped himself in his own despair. She asks if he's driven by thoughts of his girlfriend, or if he's simply lost his mind, especially after her recent hospitalization. Richard abruptly pulls the car over, revealing a twisted truth. He watched his girlfriend die, savoring her last moments. Iris, horrified, presses him about what he said to his girlfriend as she died, and he chillingly replies, "I thanked her." Desperate to appeal to any last shred of humanity, Iris reminds him of his family, pleading that if he doesn't stop, he'll eventually lose his daughter too. Her words seem to pierce his resolve, but only momentarily. Richard scoffs, claiming he's not broken, and ominously informs her that their destination has changed. He drives them to a secluded pier, where he coldly expresses regret about their shortened time together. Iris, heart pounding, seizes a hidden syringe and stabs him, but her weakened body betrays her, leaving her unable to fully press the needle. Richard laughs, mocking her frailty, and dismisses her failed attempt to fight back. Tearfully, she asks why he's putting her through this when she'd already tried to end her life on her own terms. Richard's response is chilling. He claims he wanted her to desire life again, just so he could crush that desire himself. He takes grim satisfaction in her suffering, seeing it as a reflection of his own twisted worldview. Iris, now tied and helpless, watches as Richard drags her onto a boat and begins to sail. Desperate, she spots a knife tucked into his belt. Fighting back tears, she asks for one final wish, to hold her son's toy from her pocket one last time. The sight of her broken spirit seems to soften Richard, and he leans close to retrieve the toy. With a surge of resolve, Iris grabs the knife and stabs him in the neck, driving the blade deep. Richard gasps, stumbling backward, falling overboard, leaving Iris alone on the boat. While Richard tries to climb back, Iris uses the gun and shoots him, making holes in the boat. As water starts to fill the boat, Iris struggles to stay afloat. She manages to escape, swimming to the shore, gasping as she watches Richard flounder in the water, helpless. In a final act of defiance, she looks at him coldly, thanking him for giving her the will to live once more.